Let's get started. Welcome everyone to the fourth in our series of Changemaker chats. Today we're talking about fighting fires and forever chemicals. My name is Nancy Biermeyer. I'm the Senior Policy Strategist for the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. And I'm incredibly happy to welcome all the participants, and particularly our two amazing presenters. So this Changemaker chat series is an opportunity for our community to hear about the work that we're doing and hear directly and engage with some of the great policymakers and scientists and others that have helped us do our work. And we also want to make sure that we tie the work that we do to the current issues of the day, like the COVID pandemic and or social justice issue, and so show how those impact our work and how our work impacts those issues. And today we'll be talking quite a bit about COVID. So welcome again. These webinars are free and we really appreciate your participation. It is also true that as a nonprofit, we depend on contributions from people like you to be able to continue our work to prevent breast cancer by eliminating exposures to chemicals and radiation linked to the disease. So please consider giving a gift if you can. We really appreciate it. There will be a link in the chat that you can give through, or you can go to our website at www.bcpp.org. Okay, a couple of housekeeping things to start with. All of the participants will be muted. However, if you have a technical question or a technical issue or a general question, please go ahead and drop that in the chat and we'll get back to you when we can. As we go through this conversation, you're going to hear lots of great stuff from our two presenters, and we hope that you'll have questions about that. When you think of those questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A function of Zoom. That's where we're going to look for them, and we will have a discussion at the end, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. So please don't forget them, just drop them in there. And then finally, we are recording this and we will send out in the next few days a link where you can rewatch this, or we'd love to have you share it with friends and family to help get the word out beyond them. Okay, so let's get started. I want to start by doing a little bit of background on these forever chemicals. And the class of those that we're looking at today are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And since that's such a mouthful, we're just going to call them PFAS chemicals or perfluorinated chemicals. They're a class of about 5,000 chemicals. And one of the defining aspects of the class is that they are extremely persistent. And what we mean by that is once they go into the environment, they just never break down. So thousands and thousands of years from now, they will still be out in the environment. And since each discharge into the environment sort of builds on the last, it has become ubiquitous. These chemicals are ubiquitous throughout the globe. And unfortunately, they're also toxic and toxic at very low levels. Some of the health aspects health impacts that have been connected to perfluorinated chemicals include cancer, including breast cancer, hormone disruption, kidney and liver damage, thyroid disease, birth defects, and harm to developing infants and children. And importantly, in this day and age, they've been shown to decrease antibody response to vaccines, so making vaccines less effective. So terrible chemicals that, again, are out there and continue to build up in our environment. We get exposed to them in a number of different ways. They're used in a variety of consumer products, and probably the one that people are most familiar with is Teflon and other nonstick cookware, but they also have anti-stain qualities. That means that they're used in furniture and textiles to be stain resistant. They're water repellent, so they're often used in outdoor gear and ski waxes. They have oil repellent properties, so they're frequently used in food packaging, which again can get into the food and expose us. And we've also found these chemicals in cosmetics. They're used in a number of industrial applications. And just today, we read a news article that says that pesticides that have been used by a number of states to control for mosquitoes have been found to contain perfluorinated compounds. So those are sprayed directly into the environment. The use we're going to focus on today is their use in firefighting foams. And these foams are used to combat flammable liquid fires, so gas, oil fires, the like. and they have traditionally had perfluorinated compounds in them. And all of these sources, because they don't break down, all concentrate in the environment and then contaminate water, drinking water, which is another route of our exposure. In California alone, the estimate is about 19 million Californians drink water from systems that have been shown to be contaminated by PFAS. And we know that number is tens of millions more across the country. And the number of people impacted goes up as more testing happens. And as we learn how to test for some of these chemicals, we don't even have tests in water for some of the 5,000 perfluorinated compounds out there. So it's a huge problem. The work that we have done has impacted exposure to perfluorinated compounds. The work that we've done on both cosmetics and food packaging has included trying to reduce exposures to PFAS. We actually did a report in 2015 that showed the presence of one PFAS chemical, it's called PFOA, in anti-aging creams on the market. We also worked with a number of our colleague organizations to petition the FDA to stop using this in food packaging with some limited success. And the issues that we'll be talking more about today is we've been a founder of the Women Firefighter Biomonitoring Collaborative, which you'll hear more about, and as well as a co-sponsor of SB 1044. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our two presenters. California State Senator Ben Allen was elected in 2014 to represent the 26th district in California, which covers the West Side, Hollywood, and coastal South Bay communities of Los Angeles County. Senator Allen is the chair of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, where he's been a proponent for environmental health and environmental justice, and he's been a leader in the fight against climate change. He also chairs the Environmental Caucus in the California legislature, and Senator Allen was the author of the bill eliminating PFAS in firefighting foam, or SB 1044, as you'll hear us talk about, which was just signed into law by Governor Newsom in September. Welcome, Senator. And Chief Janine, or better known as Neen Nicholson, was sworn in on May 6, 2019, as Chief of Department in the San Francisco Fire Department. Over her 24 years of service, Chief Nicholson has worked on engines and trucks and ambulances and has served every community in San Francisco. Chief Nicholson has been both injured during a fire on the job and diagnosed with breast cancer, so she understands all too well the risks that face firefighters. She's also served on the board of the San Francisco Firefighters Cancer Prevention Foundation and has championed efforts to prevent cancer and other injuries, including by reducing chemical exposures. So welcome, Chief. I want to start with you. The BCPP family first met you through the Women Firefighters Biomonitoring Collaborative, and you've worked with a number of the staff over the years. This collaborative was created out of concern from a number of San Francisco women firefighters about the number of their colleagues that have been diagnosed with breast cancer, including your diagnosis. And the collaborative brings together a number of organizations, including United Fire Service Women, who I'm told we just got a very generous donation from today. So big shout out to them. Thank you very, very much. The San Francisco Firefighter Cancer Prevention Foundation, UC Berkeley and San Francisco, Silent Spring Institute, Commonweal, and BCPP. So those are all the groups that came together. And the purpose was to do a biomonitoring study to look at chemicals linked to breast cancer and hormone disruption in women firefighters in San Francisco compared to women office workers in the city, both to identify what those exposures are and to see if there's any differences related to the occupation of firefighting. So when did you, Chief, first start being concerned about chemical exposures on the job, and why did you decide to participate in the study? And did anything about the study surprise you in terms of the results, particularly around PFAS?
So greetings, Sister Nancy. Thank you for the intro. And you should have set the bar a little lower for us, you know? You got to set the bar low and then, you know, but anyways, I digress. Thank you for all your work. Thank everyone and your organization for all your work. And Senator Allen, my hat's off to you as well. Thank you for the important work you do. So, you know, I never thought when I came into the San Francisco Fire Department in January of 1994 that cancer would be a problem or was an issue, you know? It was what we thought were like the more dramatic things, getting burned or getting injured or, you know, in fires. It was never, I never thought it was about cancer. And so, you know, I didn't really consider it until much later in my career. And it was probably, frankly, after I was diagnosed in 2012. I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, and I underwent 16 rounds of chemotherapy after I had had a double mastectomy. So I really got interested in it after that, I have to say. And, you know, there was a group of women in the San Francisco Fire Department who were really leading the charge. And, you know, just thank them for that, because they were seeing so many of our colleagues, frankly, premenopausal women in the San Francisco Fire Department getting breast cancer. We were getting it at much higher rates than the general public, and obviously premenopausal as well. So, you know, I decided right off that I would be a participant in the study. That was not even a question. And I won't say that anything about the results really surprised me. Although, you know, at home, I use all the hippie products. I don't use any of that stuff, you know, that you're talking about. And yet I still had, you know, a significant amount of this stuff in my system. So that was really an eye opener. And, you know, and it's just a good reminder also to hear from you, like, yeah, this stuff never goes away, ever. So, you know, and so, yeah, so I just decided right off the bat that I was going to be part of it. And then, of course, I got involved with all the fabulous women in the organizations, and we went around the country teaching it, which was super fun. But really, I joined in on the study and on the teaching because I didn't want anybody else to have to go through what I went through.
Thank you. And we're very sorry you had to go through that. And thank you very much for sharing your experience around it. Senator Allen, the study that we were just talking about did show higher levels of certain perfluorinated chemicals in the firefighters relative to office workers. And we used that study in advocating for your bill, SB 1044. Can you tell us a little bit about how you learned about perfluorinated compounds, what made you decide to author a bill about their use in firefighting foams, and how SB 1044 is going to help protect firefighters and our drinking water?
Yeah, no, I appreciate, first of all, thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Chief. And thank you for for telling us your story as well. There's so many of those stories out there. And, you know, and I will say, you know, in the end of the day, when we did bring the bill up for a vote on the Senate floor, and we initially thought, we thought, you know, we knew we had the votes to get it out, but we thought, you know, it'd be pretty close because we had the opposition of the oil industry and others initially. And we had one of the most conservative members of the state Senate get up and talk about how a neighbor of hers had gotten cancer and who's a firefighter, and how likely it was that it was from PFAS or something in the firefighting equipment or items that they were using. And when she got up and gave her speech, there was just a snowball effect, and next thing you knew, it became basically a unanimous vote. It was really pretty extraordinary, in spite of the fact that the oil industry still at the time had very serious concerns about our bill. You know, this is something that I'm an environmental person. It's been in my in the water, literally and figuratively for me for some time. One of my staffers, actually, her son really wants to be a firefighter, and so I think it was on her mind because she knew about this issue. She's one of our top, our top environmental staffer, and I think had been aware of this issue for some time. And the more I read about this, I mean, the cancer threat, damage to kidneys and liver, the issues involving harm to infants and children, and actually after I put the bill forward, I had the chance to watch the documentary "The Devil We Know," which is available on Netflix and very much worth seeing. It's kind of the documentary version of Dark Waters, which participant Mark Ruffalo, those guys did, and it just talks about a community not unlike my father-in-law's. He lived for a long time right on the Ohio River, on the border between Ohio and West Virginia in the Appalachian foothills, where so many people are poor people, poor working class people, are really being impacted by cancer and other things because of all the environmental damage that's being done by major factories in that area. And there's a town called Parkersburg where DuPont had a factory still does, that of course had produced a lot of PFAS in the production of Teflon, which became this kind of miracle substance for our pots and pans. And surprise, surprise, given the way that they were depositing their waste associated with the production, there were people and animals and farms that were getting very damaged, and cows and people and infant diseases that were taking place as a result of the pollution associated with this factory. And of course, over time, we've gotten a real chance to better understand all of the damage that PFAS can cause and how pervasive it is. I mean, really, these chemicals are everywhere. They're in clothing, they're in carpets, they're in so many materials that are resistant to heat, stains and grease and water. And of course, they're all over our firefighters' turnout gear and the foam that's used to fight liquid fires. I mean, it's because, of course, that they're such an effective firefighter, because they're so difficult to break down, and they're so sturdy, both in our environment and in our own bodies. So the reason why we use it, of course, is why they're so dangerous on the long term. And so anyhow, I got the more I read about this, the more I thought, man, we really have to do something about this. It was impacting our firefighter heroes. Of course, it was getting into our drinking water. PFAS has now contaminated public water systems that serve at least 7.5 million people in California. And so it was just clear to me that we had a problem. And then, of course, you start to learn about how other jurisdictions, other states, other places in the world have come up with alternatives. So we had people like Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, Clean Water Action, Environmental Working Group. They, of course, were working on the advocacy side. I wanted to do a bill several years ago on this matter, but for me, it was so important that we had full partnership with the firefighters. In the end of the day, the firefighters were the folks who had both the credibility, and I think in the end of the day, they were going to be the people that people were going to look to in sort of saying to the legislature, yes, we feel comfortable moving forward with alternatives. Because in the end of the day, as much as a firefighter doesn't want to get cancer 20 or 30 years from now, that same firefighter cares a lot more about not getting burned to a crisp 5 minutes from now. So the last thing a firefighter wants is to move us to an alternative that might be safer for him or her on the long term, but that will diminish the protection that he or she will have when fighting that fire right in front of them at the time. And so we worked with the firefighters to study the alternatives that were out there, to learn about the carcinogenic effects of PFAS, make them feel certain that these alternatives were effective. Get out there and see them in action in other countries and other states. And so once we got to a place where we could all get together, we formed this great coalition of our firefighters with our environmental folks and our cancer advocates, and came together with SB 1044. And the bill basically bans the manufacture, the sale, and the use of Class B PFAS containing firefighting foam, and also firefighting equipment, except where it's required by the federal government. And there's a couple other limited exceptions. It bans the firefighting foam for training purposes, PFAS containing firefighting foam. And then it also requires the manufacturers of PFAS containing firefighting gear that are still allowed under the bill, unfortunately, but it requires those manufacturers to notify anybody purchasing the gear if it contains PFAS. So this does not do away with PFAS altogether, but it will dramatically restrict PFAS containing firefighting foam. And it will now create this notification with regards to the firefighting gear. And I think as we get more awareness of this issue, and as the scientists continue to work on alternatives, we're going to continue to push to phase out this dangerous chemical altogether and move us toward safer alternatives.
Excellent, thank you. And again, thank you for your incredible leadership on this, and congratulations on getting it through. And I want to follow up with you on a little bit of a question about that. As COVID has disrupted all of our lives this year, it also had significant impact on the state legislature. And there are a number of obstacles that it created to moving legislation forward. For instance, legislators could only move 1 or 2 bills forward as opposed to the usual 20 to 25 that they would have in a year. It was hard, the floor sessions and the committee processes were cut short. You couldn't really it was very hard to get controversial bills to the floor. And as you mentioned, we started out with opposition from the oil and chemical industries, who are both quite significant lobbies in Sacramento. So given all of those challenges, how did you manage to get this bill through in such a challenging environment? And how important were the firefighters, particularly the California Professional Firefighters, which is the state union, and the other co-sponsors, which you mentioned, BCPP, Clean Water Action, NRDC, and Environmental Working Group. How important were all of those folks to overcoming the obstacles and resulting in, as you say, pretty much unanimous vote on the floor?
Yeah. So it was a combination, I think, of having a great coalition that was multifaceted. It wasn't just folks from the environmental community or just folks from the breast cancer or cancer advocacy community or just the firefighters. I think anyone on their own would have felt different, but having them all together, and then all the people that they bring in, right? I mean, having the firefighters there, then you bring on some labor allies. A lot of the local government people who might have been nervous felt more comfortable because the firefighters were there. So there was a value to that broad coalition. I think also part of it had to do with the fact that the coalition, I got to say, as an author who has put some very tough bills forward in the past, and I've been successful in some, and unfortunately I haven't been successful. And when I haven't been successful, they're oftentimes really tough, meaty bills where I'm trying to tackle a major problem and I'm up against very powerful special interest lobbies. And part of the challenge involved with getting a bill like this through involves working with all stakeholders and really sitting down with the stakeholders and saying, both showing strength. I mean, I think having that coalition meant that the oil and chemical people, I mean, I think in another state or under different circumstances or with a different coalition of support, the oil and chemical people would have played harder ball with us. But they saw the coalition we had. They saw the momentum that we were growing. And then we had a willingness to sit down with them. We didn't say to them, we're just barreling through. We're gonna beat you under all circumstances, because I've seen those fights before from some of my colleagues, and inevitably, I mean, so every once in a while, folks beat them, without making any compromises, but it's very rare, much more likely that you lose. And so my thought was, let's focus on our goals here, right? And this was my favorite class in law school was our negotiations class. And it's because, I think about it all the time, negotiations is all about really understanding your own priorities, truly understanding your own priorities, not your ego and your passion and your interest. What are the things that are true lines in the sand for you? And then understanding your opposition's real priorities and just getting rid of the fluff. And there's a lot of fluff out there that sometimes derails negotiations. And so we were always willing to sit down with them. We were always willing to work with them and listen to their concerns, really be thoughtful, really try to listen hard. Okay, what are your concerns? Let's go to a refinery and see it. Let's walk the refinery with our allies and think about how your needs in terms of fighting a fire at an oil refinery, for example, can fit into the needs of our bill, and how we at the same time will make sure to not let our passion for getting rid of everything involving PFAS get in the way of our keeping our eyes on the prize, which involved getting a meaningful bill across the finish line. At the end of the day, limited use in refineries is fine for me if we get all of the other things were in the bill. And so that was part of the process too. And of course, our partners allowing us the space and the flexibility to negotiate with the opposition to come to a place where we could have a very meaningful bill, but also meet some of their concerns. I think also my colleagues, to be honest, I think my colleagues had a lot of faith in our team to find a compromise. This is something that I've kind of, sort of prided myself on in the past, trying to get some tough environmental bills through that do involve striking a compromise with the opposition, but doing so in a way that still meets the core goals that I and my allies have. We ultimately managed to strike a deal and have our previous opposition go neutral by ensuring that we built in enough time to account for infrastructure and other needs. We were careful to balance the urgent need to take action with a reasonable time frame, right? That was the major issue for them. Our supporters, of course, helped us push back on the chemical and oil industry's attempts to try to get lots of loopholes in. They asked for the time frame, fine, but we want 10 loopholes. Well, in the end of the day, they really only needed 1 out of the 10, and having my partners there push back and engage and really get into the meat was super helpful. The firefighters, critically important. We first of all, we didn't want to move forward without them feeling comfortable with the alternatives, and I think our decision to make sure that the firefighters were on board from the start was super important. They have a lot of credibility. Everybody loves firefighters, Republicans, Democrats, especially right now, given how much we need. We need our firefighters, who really have been such heroes in the fight against all these wildfires. And then, of course, I also do think that another important factor that helped this law work its way through the process was the critical data that was captured in San Francisco from female firefighters with breast cancer. The issues that the chief just talked about. Breast cancer prevention partners worked really hard in this area. They had California data. They had the ability with this data to empirically demonstrate elevated levels of cancer. That stuff also helped really drive home the magnitude of this issue, and I think got us more attention. Part of the thing also involves, as you say, there was a lot of bills and that we really had to limit because of COVID. It really jammed up our ability. And so even if there, a bill like this might have gotten passed under normal circumstances anyway, because of the coalition we built, the trick was, how do we get it to float to the top? And I think the urgency of the data that you guys collected, Nancy, was critical. It was compelling, and it was the kind of thing I think that raised, rang some bells when the leadership was determining, okay, which bills need to move, which do we need to prioritize, which need to get over to the assembly and back. And so your work in that area was really critical too.
Thank you. And I do want to do a shout out, not just to you, but to your staff, who did an amazing job dealing with opposition and us and making sure that the bottom line stayed, but we were able to get where we needed to go. And of course, you had to prioritize it as one of your 2 top issues. And so the fact that you did that and your incredible position.
In case she's on, Jennifer Chase, especially, Tina Andalina as well, Shannon, we had a great team working on this, but Jen, it really was an extraordinary achievement by staff. And I think by the way, a lot of people on this call know this, but a lot of people want to go straight to the legislator, and the legislators are important. I don't mean to denigrate my profession, but the staff do so much of the work, and they really end up being such critical players in the negotiation and the nitty gritty, the details. And so we had great staff, and your ability to work so closely with them was critical here.
Yeah, I know Jen had the petroleum industry on speed dial, so I know she spent a lot of time talking to them for sure.
Cool.
So Chief, let's shift back to you for a minute. Educating and protecting firefighters from chemical exposures has been a priority for you for a number of years. And we're going to show a video that shows exactly how important it is to you. So if you can hang on one second, we're going to show a video that the Chief stars in.
Here is what a firefighter might look like if she was covered with a very visible substance. A substance composed of stearic acid, sodium lauryl sulfate, and triethylamine. We know it better as shaving cream. Though her PPE has kept the contaminants from contacting her skin directly during a fire and overhaul, she carries gross contaminants on her turnouts and tools. With this very graphic image of contamination, let's see what happens without any gross decon procedures followed. Though we know the contaminant in our example is harmless shaving cream, what if it wasn't? What if it was a toxic chemical capable of causing severe injury or illness? What if the contaminant was asbestos, benzene, arsenic, or toxic flame retardant chemicals that firefighters are exposed to on a regular basis?
Okay, well, we're going to leave a little bit of suspense for you guys to go watch the rest of it. But Chief, I think you have an acting career down in the Senator's district, should you ever decide you want one. But, you know, and I do think you should lobby next time for whipped cream instead of shaving cream, which I think we talked about.
Yes, it didn't taste quite as good as whipped cream. Yeah.
Anyway, I think we'll go ahead and we did drop the link to the entire video in the chat if people want to go watch the rest of it. And it was a joint project of a number of the groups involved in the collaborative, and including our folks from what was then called the Breast Cancer Fund, but is now Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. So as you've continued to work on chemical exposures and have been a part of this Women's Firefighter Biomonitoring Collaborative, can you talk about how the collaborative and the study results and things like this video have helped to shape the national conversation about chemical exposures? And particularly, have you seen any changes in either attitudes or procedures in the San Francisco Fire Department and or fire departments nationally around the country?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, the national conversation has really exploded in the last, you know, 7 to 10 years. And, you know, our collaborative was at the forefront of that, because we all got together and came up with a, you know, a program to teach folks. And we went to New Hampshire, we went to Florida, Arizona, to teach fire departments about exposure and how to better take care of themselves. And so, you know, that really sort of snowballed, as well as, you know, our partnerships with others, but it has really snowballed in the fire service. And once sort of labor gets a hold of it or got a hold of it, it really took off. You know, there was also a film that came out several years back, Toxic Hot Seat, which was really important to this as well, and really talks about, you know, just what the chemical companies are doing. And don't worry, it's not boring just because it's about, you know, has chemical companies in it. It was actually a really interesting documentary. But sort of since then, you know, what we've done in the department, you know, when I first came in the fire department, you know, everybody knew you were brand new. You were what we call a probie, a probationary, because you had the bright yellow stripes on your turnout coats. And so when we went to a fire, you know, it's like, hey, kid, come over here. And rub yourself up against this, this charred beam to get some dirt on you. And it was always like a badge of honor, whoever came out the dirtiest from the fire, and we'd go back to the fire station. We wouldn't decontaminate anything. We'd take our coats off, but walk around in our turnout pants that had just been in this fire, which has all sorts of toxic stuff in it. And, and then we'd bring those pants upstairs and sleep next to them. So we don't do that anymore. In fact, at every fire that we have what's called gross decon. So we set up a gross decontamination zone in front of one of our engine companies. So when firefighters come out, we can brush them off, hose them down to get sort of all the big stuff off of them. We hand out wipes so they can wipe their faces and hands. So, we've done that kind of thing. We've also, started putting bolt-on exhaust extractors on our apparatus, which are really, really impressive in terms of how they filter stuff out. We continue educating our department about this. And, we even went so far as to get a new department physician who was really, really involved with the Cancer Prevention Foundation, the Firefighters Cancer Prevention Foundation. She is now our physician, and she, basically wants her legacy to be making members safer and healthier than ever. So there's that. And then there's also, we're having to, as the senator was talking about, we need to have equipment that's safe. And so, we began several years back pushing the industry to make a gear for us that didn't contain this stuff. And, and a lot of other departments are doing that as well. So really pushing the industry to change.
Great, thank you. So I just want to take a couple, I have two more quick questions. I want to make sure we leave time for Q&A, but I really did want to get to some of the current event issues. So Senator, we'll start with you. We've been talking about these persistent chemicals, PFAS, but another persistent chemical that's out there is the pesticide DDT. And we just found out that about 500,000 barrels of DDT-laced sludge was dumped off of Catalina Island, which I think is in your district. DDT was banned in this country decades ago in the 1970s. It's linked to numerous health and environmental harms, and it's particularly linked to breast cancer. Girls that were exposed to DDT prior to the age of 14 have 5 times the likelihood of getting premenopausal cancer, which is the more aggressive form of the disease. So it's a huge problem. It was a tragic article to read, and I just wanted to see if you have any off the top of your head reactions.
Oh, wow. It was a horrific discovery. I just got my little, I'm still one of the few people who subscribes to the physical newspaper. And so I went and got my paper, and there was this, I ended up just getting enmeshed in this article over my morning coffee when I should have been having a much nicer time. And, it was just very, very troubling, very, very troubling. I, of course, immediately flagged it for my whole team. I required everyone to read it. And of course, what was especially upsetting about it was just the brazen nature in which these barrels were just being dumped, and then reports of individuals taking axes to the barrels so they could sink to the ocean floor, which of course meant that more of this stuff was getting dispersed. I mean, it was just sickening. So there were health implications, there's environmental implications. So, I've started to go down this rabbit hole, and it is a bit of a rabbit hole. And once you, those of you, there's a lot of people on this call who are more steep than I am in the joys and challenges and tribulations of engaging in environmental policy bureaucracy. But so what have we been doing? We've been partnering with our congressional colleagues to secure mapping of the area to try to identify the location of all the barrels, which is very difficult, by the way, to start with. This will likely be followed by sampling and then some sort of a feasibility study to determine the best path forward to remediate contamination. It's a very complicated issue. It's very difficult logistical work Do you go down there and do you cap? Do you try to pull these things up? If you pull them up, that could end up creating more damage. There's a lot of different jurisdictions. So anyway, we started work on it. It's difficult. If there are people on this call who know about this issue and want to help us, please do contact us. But it's running into a whole slew of different things, from the basic logistics of going deep into the ocean and trying to remediate, right the way over to the fact that Montrose, which is the company that engaged in this behavior, did like a settlement agreement, and there's a limited amount of money, and it's pretty unlikely that we can get more, legally, though there's a strategy associated with that. And so the question is, where should the money from the settlement go? There's some people who really want to focus on trying to educate fishermen and people who've been impacted by the chemicals as it relates to the way that it's got into the food stream. The type of fundamental comprehensive remediation that this would require is a lot of money. And so where do we come up with the money? And who should be liable for it? And who can't, not just who should be liable, but who can we make liable? So it's tricky, it's expensive and difficult. I want to spend some time on this, and we're trying to figure out a good path forward.
Great, thank you. Thank you for taking that on. I totally get the complexities involved with a huge toxic waste in 200 feet of water. So we stand ready to help you in any way we can, because obviously it's an issue that we're deeply concerned about. And then, Chief, just very, very quickly, can you just say a word or two about how the twin disasters of the wildfires and COVID has impacted your department in terms of, responses to both, I guess? And then we'll get to questions.
Yeah, so I think that everybody's ready for 2020 to be gone. Most of us are anyway, I'll speak for myself. But yeah, COVID, San Francisco did a really great job of getting out in front of COVID, and we shut down early. We started doing all sorts of things early on. So we have not had the same spike as other places have. And in fact, our fire department didn't have any COVID positive folks for the first 5 or 6 months of the pandemic. Since then, we've had about 42 people out of 1,700. But, we jumped on it really quickly by decontaminating, common areas of our stations 3 times a day, and always wearing our PPE, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of wildfires, we call them, some are actually wildfires, but some are what we call WUI, wildlife urban interface. Because it's not just trees that are burning out there, right? And again, this comes back to chemicals. There are a lot of, homes in places that they didn't used to be. And all these homes have all sorts of, all sorts of stuff in them. So, when they burn, hundreds or thousands of them, it's tragic. And not just because the homes burn, but because of what it does to the environment. And, firefighters out there are not wearing what we would normally wear in a house fire, because we wouldn't be able to wear that around 24/7, a big air pack on our back, et cetera. So I know that last year we collected blood and urine samples from some of our firefighters that came back from a couple of those fires. I'm not sure where we're at with that. And in terms of COVID and these fires, we've really had to adjust. The whole, incident command structures had to adjust in terms of meals, in terms of sleeping arrangements, in terms of showering, like everything has had to change. So, but we've been doing all right thus far. We do have a couple firefighters that have had lingering problems, but for the most part, knock on wood, we've been holding our own, and we have been out to quite a few wildfires this summer. So,
well, thank you to you and to the entire department for the work that you do to protect us from those fires, which are obviously, and as you say, not just forests, but those interfaces are super important. Okay, so let's see if we can get to a few of the questions we have out there. We'll start with, where are we banning these forever chemicals? And I'll start with a quick overview. There's been a lot of work on firefighting foams, and they have been identified as one of the major sources of the water contamination of perfluorinated chemicals. But there's action around in many other states around foam specifically. So 5 states altogether have banned foam: Washington, New York, New Hampshire, Colorado, and California. Although, again, credit to the senator, ours is the strongest because it bans not just sale and manufacture, but the actual use of these foams after 2022. The federal government has required the military and the Department of the Federal Aviation Administration to get out of PFAS chemicals in the case of the military. And right now there's a requirement that airports have to use foams with PFAS in it. And so they're trying to change that so that airports will at least be able to choose to use non-PFAS foams. And then the senator's bill will require that once that federal requirement is lifted. And there's lots of state activity going on around other products like food packaging in particular. I'm not aware of any that have passed, although I think there may be a couple sitting, that are pretty close, but I know that the states have been very active in legislating, again, particularly around food packaging. So we will continue to try to push that along with our allies from across the country. I don't know if the chief or the senator have anything to add to that. I'm going to jump down now to one that's about firefighting gear, and I'm just going to read this. It's a little bit long. When you talk about making new gear for firefighters, what will be used to make sure firefighters remain safe without it being toxic? I'm thinking about BPA that has been banned, and Teflon and PFOA that have been banned, and yet next generation chemicals are still just as harmful. Do you think this type of thing can be avoided with firefighting gear and chemicals? So basically the issue of regrettable substitutions, where we take this class of chemicals out, but we put something in that is just as bad.
Yeah, and that's what we have to be really careful about in terms of how we write our request for proposal from some of these companies, in terms of driving it. And as we know, the chemical companies are always looking for a way around, looking for a loophole. So I don't have all the details on what those alternatives are, but we are actively pursuing that at this time. So but again, we have to be constantly on guard with the chemical companies and others. And I know also it can be really easy to get, sort of as an aside, it can be really easy to get overwhelmed, like, oh my God, there's too much to do. Like, there's so much to do. It's crazy, right? And so I'm not going to do anything. Well, no, just start where you are. Do one thing, And so I have a lot of people in the department, doing one thing or doing two things to try to push this change. Excellent.
Here's another good question that we might want to have mentioned. So one of the questions is, are the same chemicals used in fighting wild forest fires, or is there a distinction between exposure of wildfire fighters and urban fighters? So I think the question is, the foams that we're talking about, are those the same things that are used in wildfires?
No. And we tend to use, the San Francisco Fire Department tends to use mostly water when we go out there. But there are two different classes of foam, and the one that still has to be used by at airports is the stuff that has the really terrible PFAS in it. Again, I'm not a scientist. I don't know exactly what's in the other foam, but it is much less damaging to the environment. And there are also more alternatives. I know that other departments have come up with great alternatives as well. So no, we're not putting that stuff in the in where we fight fires. But, you know, it is a good question because I'm not sure what is in the chemical that they drop, that red stuff. So good question.
Yeah, that might be one of those right to know things in the future. Okay, let's take a couple more. As we eat more and more meals to go, is there a concern about the foodware containers lined with PFAS, and should they be banned? Do either of you want to take a shot at that? I'm going to throw Senator Allen under the bus here and see if he has any thoughts about
I mean,
that.
I would love to see us move in that direction. I mean, I think that's going to be that's a tough, tough effort, but the more and more data we get on this, I think it would be a good move. So let's figure out how we can start moving in that direction. But it's not that's not going to be easy. So.
A related question that we got from our dear colleague Catherine Dodd, hi Catherine, is
I will say, by the way, if we get our big plastics, I've been working really hard on a big plastics waste reduction bill, and the bill basically phases out non-recyclable, non-compostable single-use plastics. And when I say non-recyclable, I mean truly recycle. The item has to truly be recycled in the real world, not just be technically recyclable under the best of all circumstances. And to the extent that PFAS is absolutely non-compostable, and to the extent that actually makes it hard for a plastic item to be recycled, maybe in our plastics waste reduction efforts, there could be a path there.
Yeah, that was actually another one of the questions: is how do you deal with composting products that have PFAS, and what happens when you have to redirect them to landfills because they shouldn't be recycled. I mean, they shouldn't be composted. So yeah, it's an ongoing problem.
Right.
There was another question about equally effective foam or treatments to replace perfluorinated compounds in firefighting foam. I know we talked a lot about that. Senator Allen, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it as fluorine-free firefighting foams, and I mean, I've got some. I mean, I'm looking at my I got my background material here from the. So we said, current top quality Class B fluorine-free firefighting foams are capable of meeting all the standard firefighting performance certifications applicable to AFFF and related foams. So an unfortunate exception is U.S. mil-spec, which, due to legacy wording, technicality dating from the early 1960s, requires the inclusion of fluorochemicals and has not been updated significantly since. And so I know there's an effort to try to, there's been some movement with the military, but in this area, there needs to be some more movement. But yeah, there's some good alternatives out there. And I know that airports, like Heathrow, for example, has been using this alternative foam for several years now, very effectively. Australia, I think all the major airports in Australia. So there are already test cases in legitimate major international airports that have shown success with those alternative firefighting foams.
Indeed, and just to relate back to the question we had about regrettable substitutions, I will note there are a number of different foams on the market that do not include perfluorinated compounds, and I think 5 of those foams have gone through a process, what's called the green screen. So it was analyzed by our colleagues to make sure that the chemicals that they did use were actually safer. And so that combination of no perfluorinated compounds and a certification that the rest of the chemicals in there are also not toxic is super important as we move forward.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Now, of course, we desperately need to upgrade our green chemistry program. I mean, that's kind of frightfully toothless. And there's a lot of work that has to happen in the Department of Toxic Substance Control to, up their game and get them, doing the work they need to do. So there's a lot of, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so let's see if we can get one more question in. I think this is going to be a short one because I don't know the answer. Are there any ovens, toaster ovens, grills, waffle makers, food dehydrators that do not have these toxic chemicals in them? Help. My answer is I do not know. I don't know if either of you know. I don't know.
Can you phone a friend and find out?
We can do a little bit of research and see if we can get back to folks with that.
Maybe the good senator knows.
No, I don't know, but I mean, who's the best organization out there that, who have you found, Nancy, that's the best organization out there to basically let the public know about toxicity in everyday items? Who do you guys like to turn to?
Well, we do a lot of that, particularly around cosmetics and food packaging, but there are a lot of groups out there working on perfluorinated compounds. And one of the groups that has done a lot of work on PFAS is the Environmental Working Group. They were featured in that The Devil We Know film that you mentioned earlier. So they have a lot of information out there, and there are probably a lot of other organizations. I don't know of anybody who focus specifically on toaster ovens and the like, but certainly there, waffle makers who don't have Teflon would be better. I'm not sure what they are actually using as the nonstick aspect. But I think, as with all of these, as the public becomes more and more aware, more and more companies will get away from using these chemicals. And then the challenge that we've talked about is to make sure they don't use something just as bad.
But it does take an organization. And you mentioned, I mean, obviously EW, Environmental Working Group, there's a lot of good groups out there, but it takes an organization to not only raise awareness of the issue, but then kind of be very granular, sort of say, take toaster, some almost like a Consumer Reports for toxicity. So, there are 50 major toaster makers, 10 of them are much better than the others for toxicity reasons, and here's why. And there ought to be some group out there that does a website that helps people make these decisions. I wish I knew.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but again, we can sort of think about that. So we're out of time. I will say we've gotten a couple of chats. Look for cast iron on all those things, particularly waffle irons as another option.
That's right. I mean, if you think about it, Nancy, right? It's like anything, human beings live very perfectly happy lives 50 years ago without any of this BS. So basically buying items that were used by your grandmother is probably the safest way to go.
Exactly. That's a good edict to live by. All right, so we're just about at time. So I want to take a minute again to thank our fabulous presenters. I want to thank all of you that have participated. We do want to ask one more time that you think about making a contribution. We work really hard, and we've had our challenges during COVID, and we can't do this work without your support. And there's a link in the chat. It's never too late to donate, and no donation is too small. So please, if you can, we know it's a tough time for folks, and huge thank you to those who have contributed already, and we'll continue to do this work and love your support to do it. So thank you again.
Having folks like Nancy and her organization working on legislation at the highest levels is so valuable. I mean, the money you give to an organization like this really helps her elevate the issues that everybody on this call cares about in an effective, powerful way. And so, those little contributions really do make a difference. Believe me, there's a lot of money on the other side, and so we need to counteract it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. We really appreciate it. So with that, we will thank everyone, and we hope you have a great holiday season, and please stay safe out there. It's a crazy time.
It is. And just go out and do one little thing. That's all you got to start with.
There you go.
All right.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Nancy.
Senator.
Thanks, Senator. Thanks, Nance. All right. Ciao.